Hi, everyone. Um, I wanted to do something a little bit different. We've now spent quite a long time looking at all the various text messages, emails, deposition transcripts, some agreements, and we now have a lot of information. What I will say is it is just a scratch of the surface because these exhibits are just what was attached to specific motions. Um, they are you know, such a small percentage of what the full discovery is likely to be. Um, but I'm pretty sure it was my Josh Greenstein deposition transcript. Someone really kindly commented and sort of said, "Do you know, I think Colleen Hoover may have, Wayfarer may have a good claim for tortious interference against Colleen Hoover." And I've been thinking about this for a little while. And I spent the whole weekend, um, the end of last week and the whole weekend looking through all the materials again, and I think I've now got enough materials to put together a video on that. So that's what I'm doing, Colleen Hoover here now. I've also got enough materials though to look at tortious interference claims against WME, Taylor Swift, Matt and Lucy Damon, breach of contract claims against Sony because, Sony can't interfere in its own contract in theory, so it would be a breach. And I have something as well planned to do for Ryan Reynolds. I'm not going to do tortious interference with Blake Lively or Ryan Reynolds because Wayfarer already had that as part of their complaint, which is now dismissed. They may do something with that. If they appeal, they may bring that back. I'm not sure. So I'm not gonna rehash that. It's quite obvious that those 2 in particular interfered in the contracts. So I'm just going to look at, I'm gonna look at all the other side players, but, there is something for, just to look at consequences, not necessarily claims, but consequences potentially for Ryan Reynolds for his kind of active participation in all of this. But 2 things though is firstly, this is a very hypothetical situation. There is absolutely nothing telling me that Wayfarer intend to bring any claims against anyone else. And it is very much up to them if they want to, pursue any other litigation because litigation is expensive, it's exhausting, it's very public, and it's not a guaranteed outcome. So they may not want to do it. And frankly, I wouldn't blame them. The other thing is, this is just my opinion. Okay, so this is what I've come to, having looked at all the information. Someone else may come up with a completely different view, or agree with my view overall, but come up, decide that actually a different exhibit is better. The reasoning behind it, the rationale is, they may have a different rationale. If there was just one answer for every scenario, then we would not need to have trials. We have trials because, you know, usually 2 opposing sides go to court and make their arguments and show their evidence. And then someone else decides, which is the side they prefer. And so it's okay for there to be, different opinions. That doesn't mean that, I'm wrong. Doesn't mean I'm right either. So this is my view. I'm going to look at this under California law as well. The reason being is, if Wayfarer, hypothetically again, if Wayfarer were to consider bringing a claim for tortious interference against Colleen Hoover, I believe they would do it under California law. That's what they did with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. Although it was in a New York court, they were applying California law to it, and Judge Lyman actually applied California law when he, went through his order dismissing it. So that is where I think Wayfarer would potentially go if this was to ever become a real situation. Okay, so under California law, there are a number of elements that have to be satisfied. And the first one is fairly obvious. There has to be a valid contract. For tortious interference with contract, there has to be the existence of a valid contract. And this brings me to what I have on the screen now. So just to show you, this is actually the agreement between, this is a red line version, but I've got no reason to believe that there wasn't a final, fully executed version of this. But this is the draft, like a draft proposal, basically, between Sony and Wayfarer, setting out the terms of their agreement to, co-finance It Ends With Us. And clause 6, director, Justin Baldoni to direct, picture to be edited at location of his choosing, final cut to be determined by a bake-off. So there's no doubt, right? Contractually, Wayfarer were entitled to a bake-off. Okay. It gives further information about scores and various things. I won't go into that because I'm not going to pretend I understand the scores particularly, but also, it's not really relevant to what my thought process is. Okay, so that clearly shows that there is a valid contract, right? So element 1 is satisfied with no problem whatsoever. Element 2, did Colleen Hoover have knowledge of the contract? Okay. Again, there may be discovery that exists where she expressly says, I'm aware of the bake-off. But that is not actually necessary here. This email is dated the 20th of May. It's from Colleen Hoover to Josh Greenstein. It is a very, very, very long document where there's I think she says there are 57 things I love more about Blake's cut than Wayfarer's, and this is where she lists all of them and more. All the way through, she acknowledges that there are 2 cuts, right? If I go to a point where we can definitively show that she was aware of 2 cuts, point 16, right? Wayfarer's newest version. Okay. But in Wayfarer's, on the third line at the end there, but in Wayfarer's version. And then you got the big bold, big capitalized, however, in Blake's version. But it's not, can I highlight this? I don't think I can. Oh, yeah. But it's also not in your face like it was in Wayfarer's version. Oh, I can actually highlight it. Right, okay. Let me just make that a bit easier for everyone. Okay. So this is just one of all of these, points that she made, but just in this one alone, you can see she talks about Wayfarer's newest version. So she's aware that Wayfarer's had a couple of versions themselves, right? And she's also referring to opposing version, i.e. Blake's version. So this kind of email memo shows me that she was aware that there were 2 cuts, right? And there were 2 competing cuts. At this point, it sounds like she was aware that the studio had not yet chosen, because I don't think they met any of the requirements, so it was down to the studio had the right of choice at this point. Justin's were scoring higher, but there was the difference, the required difference in the contract of, you know, he didn't score above 90 to 85 in the top 2 boxes. He didn't score above 70 in the definite recommends, and there was not at least 7 points. He was not at least 7 points higher in definite recommends than, Blake's. So none of those were actually hit, which meant that Sony had the decision on which cut it would use. This memo from Colleen Hoover is designed to be influential. And I believe she knew her opinion could influence the choice. In fact, why don't we go to the deposition? Okay. So this is Josh Greenstein's deposition. Gabernsky, who was representing Lively at this point, is showing an exhibit. Right, what is this? A message text between me and Blake, and where she sent me Colleen's reaction to her cut. Okay. Okay, and Gabernsky says, okay, let me break that up. By Colleen, you mean Miss Hoover? Yes. And when you say her cut, you mean what you've been referring to as Sony's cut. See, Gabernsky had to correct Josh Greenstein. Like, no. Remember, it's Sony's cut. You keep calling it Blake's cut. And in the deposition, Gabernsky had to say, when you say Blake's cut, you mean Sony's, yeah? We've been referring to it as Sony's. Yes. And what was Miss Hoover's reaction to viewing Sony's cut? Right, we know it was Blake's cut because even Colleen Hoover refers to it as Blake's version. Based on the text, I have a list of 57 things I love about yours more. You killed it. And then she put some of her specific thoughts, and as I wrote, he thought amazing good news. Right? He's then asked, why is it good news? Right? And this is kind of the important bit. It's important. No matter what cut of the movie, no matter what cut of the movie you go with, in terms of the film and in terms of the marketing that cut, the author, someone as much influence and understanding of the audience, Colleen Hoover, supports it and thinks it, champions it. Okay? So, Colleen Hoover's opinion was actually incredibly influential. There is no doubt about that. Josh Greenstein has said that himself. And there is Gabernsky again then here asks, so what weight would you place on Miss Hoover's opinion? Greenstein says, a lot. And how did you consider Miss Hoover's opinion in deciding what cut of the film to release? I would say it had a big sway. Even more than testing metrics. I don't know if I'd say more, but on par. If she had a real problem with something that was in the film, we would have a major problem. That makes it really crystal clear how much influence Colleen Hoover had in influencing Sony's decision to use Blake Lively's cut. And that memo, you get a memo like that, it goes on and on and on and on. There were 64 paragraph points, numbered points, right? Where she basically was negative about Wayfarer's cut, was effusively positive about Blake Lively's cut. So, to me, she was trying to shape the outcome. And that is legally sufficient because California law does not require a specific, I know there is a bake-off clause. It just requires kind of an inference that evidence that she was aware that there is a decision pending between two parties and she is trying to influence it. And I think this memo does actually show that. So for me, personally, I believe that this is sufficient. The next element is the intentional acts are designed to induce a breach or disruption. So this 54-point memo, right, it was sent 2 days after the final bake-off. It was also in response to, Blake Lively had actually asked her to do that. We need to remember that as well. Blake Lively had asked Colleen Hoover to contact the studio. Blake Lively had told Josh Greenstein, Colleen's going to contact you, but she loves it. Okay, so let's go to the text messages between Blake Lively and Josh Greenstein. Okay, so they're talking about all the numbers and everything. I mean, this line I find interesting. Someone's got to babysit their whole crew from grabbing a tablet and boating. I would say that's interference, not from Colleen Hoover, from Blake Lively, obviously. I don't see Josh Greenstein. I mean, he says, I'm on patrol. Now, what he doesn't say in response to that message, by the way, is, oh no, we can't do that. That's completely unethical and inappropriate. Wayfarer have got a contract for a bake-off. We can't interfere with that process. It's got to be, fair and unbiased. Doesn't say that. But you'll see a lot of this, like I'll raise all of this in like my Sony segment. But we get down here. And this is obviously Blake Lively's message, Colleen and I are declaring now this is the cut. Now, this in itself is not proof against Colleen because this is Blake Lively saying it. Okay, but bear with me. We will work to improve this cut, but Colleen said tonight, I would much rather have your cut exactly as it is be released than his cut. Even with the lower numbers, I don't like his cuts. And you know how I feel about this. I believe that this is a far better, more elevated, most evergreen version of the film, and quality to me always wins. So it doesn't matter that Justin Baldoni's scoring higher and Blake Lively's numbers were lower. Like Colleen Hoover's like, yeah, but I still prefer this cut, right? So okay. And we do know that Colleen Hoover then sent that memo. She actually followed up and said, oh, look, here's all the reasons that I love Blake. So although one thing that is confusing me, is the memo is dated. So the email from Colleen Hoover is dated the 20th. The dates can't be right on this. The dates cannot be right. How can they still be looking at numbers? The actual bake-off was on the 18th of May, and Colleen Hoover sent I'm waiting for the scores. But these text messages are dated the 30th and 31st of May, which is not the same as the dates that were in the deposition transcript put to Josh Greenstein. Because remember, he couldn't remember the dates, but Lively's attorney said, well, I put to you that these were the dates, and gave 3 dates. 23rd of March, there was, I think, Yeah, no, sorry, 28th of March, 13th of May, and May the 18th, right? I don't know how long it takes for scores to come, I will say that. So it may be that, but it's I'm just questioning in my head, does it take several days, over a week? I don't know, maybe. It may well do. Um, so 2 days after the alleged final bake-off was Colleen Hoover's memo, all the things I love, right? But then these text messages don't make sense. Colleen and I are declaring this is the 31st of May. Colleen and I are declaring this is the cut. We will work to improve this cut, but Colleen said I would much rather have your version, even with the lower numbers. I don't like his cuts. Yeah, that's confusing. And then obviously at the bottom, it's done from my perspective, from Colleen's, from Taylor's. And then, and from Sony's question mark is it's almost like a, it better be done from your perspective too. So go and tell Wayfarer. I'm questioning the dates a little bit, but that could be perfectly normal. I just don't know why. Yeah, we'll run with that, right? We'll just leave it there. I won't go into it too much. I'll have to look into it further, actually. Yeah. So, you know, Blake Lively is saying, "Look, I don't care." Right? Colleen Hoover backs me to the hilt, but then we obviously see Colleen Hoover has sent a long-winded email, basically, saying, "Yeah, all these things I love about Blake Lively's cut, all the things I hate about Wayfarer's cut." So, yeah, she pretty much urges Sony to adopt Blake Lively's version. I think her email also uses quite detailed and persuasive language, and most importantly, it was sent directly to the decision maker, right? Now, whilst that may not have been specifically Josh Greenstein, I think he said in his deposition transcript he didn't have the final say, but he is high up in Sony and has the ear of the person who does have the final say. And as he said in his deposition transcript, the author's opinion and how she felt about the cut of the film was important, at least as important as the actual test scores themselves. So, in my opinion, that's textbook interference. Just to say that. Yeah. There was, what else was there? One sec, just looking for something. Okay, so we now have the email that was sent, it was a couple of months later actually, to both Ange Giannetti and Josh Greenstein. And this is where basically Colleen Hoover has said, "I'm not going to go to the premiere. I don't know if I want to go, etc., etc." And although this doesn't actually, I'm not sort of going through this to say that this affected the Bake Off. Because of the timing, I'm not sure at what point the decision was actually made to use which cut. But this, to me, this is just a bit of a pattern from Colleen Hoover of, going directly to studio executives, and kind of leveraging her influence on them. And in this particular situation, this was because, they were talking about, well, I don't really want Justin there. So yeah, I'm like, okay, so she's, it's not a one-off. That memo was not a one-off. This is another one where she's like, well, if Justin goes, then, I might not go. I'm gonna support Blake. And, yeah, it's just, there is, a repetition of kind of interference. This in itself, though, does not affect the Bake Off. What I think does affect the Bake Off, though, is, um in fact, I will go and find the video. Okay, let's have a look at this. There's a couple of videos I want to actually show you, but we'll look at this one first. By and large, it's the movie You Will See. Yeah? This is not it's the film is not done. It's not done, but she's telling everyone, "I'm gonna show you it, and this will be the movie that you go and see." Okay, so this is the other section. It's a few minutes, but I just think it's worth looking at the whole thing. I know the last part of it is a really infamous clip that we as sleuths have kind of used over and over again, but the build up to it I found quite telling as well. And now I'm looking at things differently in the context of all these, informations, communications, and everything that have been unsealed. So let's just have a look at this. I think Scolari was in this. That's her friends and family screening. Just to point out a couple of things, right? So one, Colleen Hoover had already planned this. This is her event. This is her kind of book bonanza event. She had planned for a 20-minute clip of video, which you're about to hear Blake Lively took against the wishes of Sony. Brandon Sklenar is acting like an idiot, but he's managed to push from a 20-minute clip to the full movie, the full unfinished movie. I think it was cool. I believe they were all in on this. They knew this was going to happen. But we'll continue. So I'll stop there. So yeah, in her negotiations, shall we call it, with the studio, that would be people like Josh Greenstein, that would be people like Ange Giannetti. They didn't want her to take it. She took it anyway. Um, they said you can only show 20 minutes, and now she's got the film there away from them. You know, how easy was that for Brandon Sklar to say, "Oh, let's just show the whole thing." Oh, okay then. There was no pushback. No, that I can't do that. The studio have said, only 20 minutes. And Wayfarer are not in this at all. So, yeah. Um, where do I think this puts liability on Colleen Hoover? It's her event, and she was aware as well that she was going to be. She said herself, "Well, we hired a movie theater." It sounds like preemptive planning to me. Problem is now is what's happened is this is outside of the Bake Off process, and she is test screening a movie to family and friends without any authorization. She's also test screening now to wider public audience, her version, her cut of the film. And then, as we saw with the first part is, well, you can go and see this movie. You'll see it again in August. So not although she's saying it's not done. She is actually asked directly, well, it won't be a different movie, will it? And she kind of gives like a bit of a head bob because she can't say, oh yeah, it will definitely be, because that's not true. It could change. That's the whole point. That's why Sony did not want her to take it. It's like, well, hold on, what if we need to change it? What if we need to do this? I think what Blake Lively interpreted as Sony saying, well, what if we change it? That meaning, what if we pick Justin's? Now, this event was the date on that interview was the 14th of June, which is again, that's only 2 weeks after the text messages to Josh Greenstein, 3 weeks after the memo from Colleen Hoover to Josh Greenstein, and a month after the Bake Off, the last one. Again, I don't know the sequence. I don't know exactly when Sony firmly said, right, we're going with this cut. I don't know at what point that happened. But this is, the dates are so quite close in the timeline. So, it's safe to assume that this is part of the decision may not have been made at this point. But Colleen Hoover then agreeing and facilitating the unauthorized screening to the public of the film against the wishes of both Sony, and I don't know if it's just against the wishes or against the wishes and without the knowledge of Wayfarer. That is, kind of conspiratory, and interference. So collectively, would we say that Colleen Hoover's, actions were designed to, in kind of induce a breach or disruption to the process? I would say yes. Yes, they did. Then the fourth element to, uh, tortious interference claim, was there an actual breach or disruption? Now, there's no need to prove that the bake-off was actually abandoned. It wasn't anyway, but that's not required. What is required is evidence that the process was disrupted or compromised. And again, I think when we look at her email, um, it influenced Sony's internal discussions, certainly. And it gave them kind of political cover almost to pressure Wayfarer. I think it did shift the studio's posture towards Blake Lively's cut as well. I mean, they said as much in the deposition, when we go back and you think about the questions, well, how influential was the author? Josh Greenstein was like, yeah, very. It was, her influence was incredibly important, very influential, a lot. What weight would you place on Miss Hoover's opinion? A lot. So the fact that Colleen Hoover had actually exercised her opinion, she, expressed it in writing, I think it did compromise the bake-off process. I also think it may have contributed to the message. Let me just see if I have got it out. There's so many exhibits. So many exhibits to get through. Okay, here it is. This message as well. Not necessarily, right? But collectively, because obviously this message actually predates all of that so far. But all of these people throwing in weight. Now, this one in particular was Blake Lively's mention of Taylor Swift, right? So this wasn't Colleen Hoover. But when you got, and I'll do Taylor Swift separately, but when you've got all of these people, these influential people putting pressure or being leveraged, whether it's with their knowledge or not. Right now, Blake Lively did the leveraging and threw around Taylor Swift's name, and this caused Josh Greenstein to send this message to Jamie Heath: "You guys don't want to play ball. You are going to delay and greatly hurt the movie. Good luck." And then also, that is only if I don't know what else there was, but that is only if you want to make this date. We are going to need to push finish director cut, and we can have multiple previews down the road. So that's basically Josh Greenstein saying, look, get on with your cut. We will have further screenings down the road. And I think this is where Wayfarer have tried to say, well, hold on a minute. If I remember the text messages, I think Jamie just said, look, can you call us? And Josh Greenstein, this was the response. If you don't play ball, you are going to delay and greatly hurt the movie. So at this point, all the leveraging was coming together and clearly influencing Sony. So whilst that's not direct, Colleen Hoover, I'd like to kind of show you the effects that was beginning to happen. Yeah, that's a good example. There was obviously at that point there was pre-Bake Off bias. That's what that text message shows me. And again, I'll go through this a little bit more when it comes to the Sony video. But like that was the mindset of Sony already because of the leverage by Blake Lively, because she was, name dropping her famous friends who are very influential. So there was, in my opinion, there was already pre-Bake Off bias. So Colleen Hoover then being asked to get involved and send over this, that, and the other to Josh Greenstein. Like, no, You can't do this. There are 57 reasons why I prefer Blake's. I mean, that's a lot. That's more than both, Blake Lively's 17-point list and 30-point list combined. And I think, yeah, there is evidence there that the process was disrupted and or compromised. And then that satisfies the fourth element for actual breach or disruption. Then we look at damages. Yes, I think that her interference potentially did contribute towards a loss of a fair bake-off myself. Why? Because I think the reason Blake Lively was asking Colleen Hoover to, was putting forward what Colleen Hoover had said and leveraging Colleen Hoover was because she was acutely aware that Sony were like, yeah, I know, but Wayfarers are scoring higher. If you look at these messages, right? Well, I've spoken to Colleen. She feels like I do. Still full steam ahead with my cut. I asked her to text you as well, so you're not taking my word for it. Okay? And then she's aware that her cut has not done great, right? Because if you look at this at the top here, that said, I can and will get our numbers up. So she's acknowledging that her cut did not do as good. And she's saying, look, I can do better on it, but you need to approve me doing the cut. So there you go. I'm so happy to be able to be perspective and clear, prescriptive. Right, she does correct it actually to prescriptive. I'm happy to be prescriptive and clear about where to improve. So she's acknowledging that she did not do as well, and I think that she thought that Sony were going to lean and say, do you know what? No, we have to go with Wayfarers. And that's where she brought in Colleen Hoover and quite literally said, I have asked her to text you so you don't take just my word. Colleen Hoover then said pretty much a book on all the things she loved about Blake Lively's cut, hated about Justin Baldoni's. So, in my opinion, the cut was, it wasn't a fair bake-off. Wayfarer ended up with loss of creative authority. There was reputational harm to Wayfarer. There was, and then she continued on then as well with like kind of potentially disruption of the premiere and promotional obligations because she's excluded him from Book Bonanza. She has, which was heavily used for promoting the film, even showed the film. They barely mentioned him on stage at all. And then, then there was well, I might not go to the premiere if Justin's there. And it's nothing about sexual harassment at all. There's not sexual harassment. Any workplace harassment that's not even anywhere near the email. It's all about, well, they might take credit for what Blake Lively did, and I don't blame Blake. So she's basically saying, well, Blake don't want to go, I'm going to support her. And it's basically women ganging up on women. Women ganging up on the executive producers. They are not party to the contract, though. Blake Lively, Colleen Hoover, no one else is party to the contract. It was a contract between Wayfarer and Sony. It could even have harmed, because I'm guessing, although I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming that Justin Baldoni would have some kind of contract between himself as an actor or director and Wayfarer Studios, or It Ends With Us movie, right? I'm sure he would have some kind of loan out agreement kind of thing, similar to Blake. Although he is the head of Wayfarer Studios, he was serving in multiple capacities. He was a director, he was an actor. And he was the person, because it was Justin Baldoni. I don't know one way or another, but when we saw the optioning of the book rights from Colleen Hoover, that's appeared to be Justin Baldoni as Justin Baldoni, an individual, not he wasn't doing it on behalf of Wayfarer. So who owns the rights to the book? Is it Justin Baldoni as an individual, right? Or is it Justin Baldoni as, you know, one of the heads of Wayfarer Studios, who has purchased the rights to the book and is adapting it into a film? I think it's Justin Baldoni as an individual. I'm not, if I remember correctly, I don't even think Wayfarer Studios were set up in 2019. It might have been Wayfarer Entertainment, but again, I see nothing where there's reference to Wayfarer Entertainment owning the rights of the book. It is Justin Baldoni. So there would have been some kind of contractual thing going on for, you know, between Justin Baldoni, the owner of the books, and Wayfarer, the you know, the studio that adapted the book. Then there would have been some kind of contractual there would have been some kind of agreement or contract in place for Wayfarer between Justin Baldoni, the actor, and Justin Baldoni, the director. Or it could have been an Ensworth's movie. Again, without all of these documents in front of me, it's really hard. But yeah, there may even be an argument to say that, you know, she interfered with those agreements as well. And we haven't seen the actual agreement between Colleen Hoover and Justin Baldoni for optioning the book. One thing I can categorically state is there was no morality clause. Okay? There was no, if he does something, then the rights revert back to her. That does not. So to kind of wrap this up now, summary. I think that the evidence that is there so far, just the evidence that's there so far, and again, I'm open to changing my mind if further evidence, you know, enters the docket which contradicts some of this. But on what's available, they do actually support a claim of tortious interference against Colleen Hoover. Her conduct certainly sort of appears to demonstrate the important elements: knowledge, intentional interference, direct communication to the contracting party, i.e. Sony. The timing, it appears to be designed to influence the contractual process, and coercive pressure. So, yeah, I do think, I think all in all, you know, there is enough there. Again, what will Wayfarer actually do? They probably won't claim anything from her, but, you know, we'll always know. And yeah, I think that's my thought process on this. Love to hear what anyone else thinks. All right, guys. I will probably do Taylor Swift next, followed by Matt and Lucy Damon.